Hey everyone, this is Alicia Avant. Let me make sure my head's not being cut off here. Good morning. Welcome to this webinar. It is Podcasting First Steps. And I wanted to let you know that if you are wanting to comment on this post and me be able to tell who it is, you'll need to click on the comment here, the StreamYard thing, and sign in. So let's get started. I wanted to share my screen really quick. So let me see if I can't do that. Present, share screen. Okay, great. So now you should be able to see my PowerPoint as well as me at the same time, which is great. So podcasting first steps. Without further ado, we will just go ahead and get started. This will be recorded so you can watch it later. So let's get started. All right, so first of all, let me introduce myself. If you are new to the group or you just never watched one of my free trainings, then you will want to know a little bit about me. First of all, I'm Alicia Avant. I have been a virtual assistant for 16 years this past October, and I mostly work with Christian authors, speakers, and coaches to help build and maintain their online presence through email marketing, social media marketing, and website, and building and maintaining your website. And I am also a podcaster. I have had a podcast since August of 2020. It originally started as the Virtual Assistant Advantage podcast, and then I changed the name this past June to the Christian Business Advantage. And so if you've never listened to my podcast, I would love to invite you to search for that on your favorite podcasting app. And this month on the podcast, we are talking all about podcasting, and that is why I'm doing this training this time on podcasting, because it is such a great way for Christian authors, speakers, and coaches to market their business and to share their expertise. And so that is why I think podcasting is great for that purpose. I, if you cannot tell, live in the South, where we've been frozen over for days. My kids have not been to school in a week, and the temps have not been above freezing until today. So it's been crazy here. But let's get into the podcast stuff. So first, I want to start with some questions to ask yourself before starting a podcast. That very first question is, why do you want to start a podcast? You know, I wanted to have a podcast before I even knew what I wanted to start a podcast about. Like, I just really wasn't sure. I just knew that I really liked the idea of podcasting, and I wasn't sure what my purpose would be. So that's the first question I had to ask myself. Why do you want to start a podcast? What am I going to podcast about? The next question is, what is your goal? My goal was to reach a larger audience than I had before, to reach a new audience. You know, sometimes we have to go out of our comfort zone, out of the circles that we're already in order to reach a larger audience or to reach new people. And so that was my goal. Who is your show for? Who are you wanting to speak to? For me, at the beginning, I was wanting to speak, when I had the VA podcast, I was wanting to speak to women who are, who wanted to work from home and wanted to become a virtual assistant. And then after that, when I realized that a lot of my clients were listening to my podcast, I decided to open it up more to VAs and those that they serve. And finally, I just decided to go to those that I serve, because I had so many people listening that were in that demographic. So decide your demographic, the type of person, that you're wanting to listen to your podcast. The next one is, how often do you plan to publish your podcast? One of the most important things about this question is, how often are you going to be able to be consistent to publish your podcast? You don't want to publish a podcast and just be willy-nilly and not have a set schedule. You want to publish it on a set schedule. I publish a weekly podcast. I know people who publish daily podcasts, monthly podcasts. The most important part is that you're consistent, and that you show up and you record and you put out a podcast every time that you say that you will. Okay. The next one is, how long do you want your podcast to be? I'm just going by my podcast and giving you an example. My podcast is usually about 7 to 15 minutes at the most. And I like doing this because I know business owners are busy and just need that quick tip, that quick business strategy. And I enjoy, being able to do a short, simple podcast. It's going to depend on the type of podcast that you record and publish, as to the length, obviously. We're going to talk about some types of podcasts here in a minute. But these are some great questions to start when you are thinking about starting a podcast. These are some great questions to get you brainstorming and coming up with what you're going to do. All right. Let's talk about some types of podcasts. So, the first one is an interview style podcast. If you are a listener of podcasts, you've probably listened to podcasts before that have this what I call interview style. It is a host, which would be you, interviewing a guest, which would be your guest would be an expert that you were interviewing, or maybe they're telling about their life or telling their story. So interview style is a really popular style of podcast, but it has its own set of challenges. And the second type is a scripted nonfiction podcast. These use a single theme for the entire season. And if you listen to podcasts, you may have heard one of these really popular podcasts that is this type is called Serial. It is a podcast that is a scripted nonfiction, so meaning it's a real life example of telling stories and things like that. I love these type of podcasts as a listener. It tells real stories, and these are fun for me to listen to. A third type of podcast is a news podcast. These give you the news in a simple and digestible format. So these are also great to listen to, and these would be a great option. And the fourth type is educational. These are normally scripted. They're normally nonfiction. The function is primarily to teach you something. And I personally feel that my podcast falls into this category. I'm teaching you something about, business as a Christian author, speaker, or coach. There's a fifth one that I did not list here, basically because I liked the layout of this. And that is a scripted fiction podcast. They tell a story mostly for entertainment. There are other types, but these are the five main types of podcast. So let me go to the next slide. So let's talk about some podcast necessities. We asked ourselves some questions, but these are some pieces that you'll need to start a podcast. First of all is a title. You want to think of a title that is keyword specific to the target market that you're looking for. That is why I started out with virtual assistant in the podcast title, and why I use the word Christian business in my current podcast title because of that reason, because you want to be keyword specific. So think about what you would search if you were looking for the type of podcast that you were wanting to start. What would you search? Would you go in and type in, Christian business owner? Would you type in author? Would you type in coach? What would you type in to look for that podcast? And that will help you kind of brainstorm some podcast ideas. For the next thing is branding. If you already have a business, obviously you want your podcast to match your business. You want your podcast to match your business branding. All of my business branding has these purple colors that I use. I use those across the board in all of my business branding, which is why my podcast has the same colors, the same, purple colors in it for matching my brand. And that's what you want to do. Match your brand across the board. And then you will need a cover image. Let me see if I cannot share with you by just pulling up my cover image real quick to give you an example. Okay, I'm going to share this tab instead, and you should be able to look at this and see this is my cover image here. This is my cover image. I hope that works. Let me see if it did. Yes, it did. Great. So here's my cover image. It has me. It has my podcast name. It has my name, and that is, my cover image. This is just an example. So let's go back to sharing the other screen. Okay, and so the last thing is a description. And I guess I should have stayed there because I want to show you. Let me share this again. Here's my description. Mine is a little long, but you can have it as long or as short as you want. But this describes what my podcast is about. It describes what the podcast is about. So you want to use some keywords there. Make sure that you're talking about what you will cover as far as topics. You see here, I say I'm going to cover topics such as email marketing, social media mastery, content marketing, repurposing your content, and the art of building and maintaining a compelling website. I also tell that I am talking to authors and speakers, So if you're an author, speaker, or coach, I explain exactly what I'm talking about and who I am talking to. And that way people can decide if this podcast is right for them or not. So let's go back to the screen there. All right, so let's keep going. What are some benefits of podcasting? Now, as I said in this month's podcast episode about the first steps that I did a week or so ago, the purpose of me sharing this is not to convince you to start a podcast. That's up to you. The purpose of this is to give you some first steps if you've been considering starting a podcast. But here are some benefits if you have been considering. The first one is they allow for in-depth discussions and exploration of topics that may not be covered in mainstream media. A lot of times people start a podcast because they feel that they have something to share with the world that's not already out there. Or they have it from a different perspective than what is currently out there. So that's awesome, right? And then they offer a more personalized listening experience as listeners can choose shows that align with their interests and their values. Another great reason. You listen to things that you're interested in and that align with your values. And then finally, they are convenient and accessible as listeners can tune in anytime and anywhere. This is the best part. I love this about podcasts because if I have it on my iPhone, I can, when I am, waiting at the school for my kids to get out, in the car, I can listen to podcasts. I can listen while I am working. Sometimes I do that if it's something that I just can kind of, multitask on. I can listen while I'm taking a shower. I can literally listen to a podcast anytime and anywhere, like this says. And so that is one of the benefits of podcasting. All right. Now we're going to get into some podcast essentials. The very first one is a podcast host. Now, there are multiple podcast hosts out there and available. Let's start with what I call the freebies. There is one that was previously called Anchor, and it was at anchor.fm. It is now called Spotify Podcast. It is free, and I have clients that use it. And in fact, when I started my podcast, I started out on Anchor, what was, now Spotify. I started out on Anchor because it was free. And then I wanted to have a few more bells and whistles. And so I moved over to what I have now, which is Buzzsprout. I love Buzzsprout and highly recommend it. There are others. Another one that I have that some clients have used is called Libsyn. That's Libsyn. And I like to listen, but I really liked Buzzsprout more. And so the first thing you need is a podcast host, and that is where your podcast will live, so to speak, kind of like a website host. The second one is podcast equipment, which we're going to get into the details of in a future slide here. And the third is a room with good sound. I struggle with this because I have this portable building, and this is a 10 by 10, but it has like laminated floors, and I have one rug in here, but it's just kind of open and airy, and I struggle with the sound quality in here. This is the reason that some podcast hosts record their podcasts from their closet, because the acoustics are so good. And the clothes really help muffle the sound, which is so funny. I've done that before, but I no longer have my office and my podcast equipment in my house, so I cannot do that at the time. So let's dive in a little bit more to this podcast equipment. And I have some notes I'm going to pull up about this because it's a little bit more in depth, so to speak. So the first thing is a microphone, and a microphone is a required piece of equipment. And don't worry, you don't have to take like exuberant amount of notes here. I am going to share a freebie download with you that has links to some of these microphones that I'm going to talk about. So except where circumstances dictate otherwise, you will need a microphone. And so considering the best option, they are less sensitive to background and outside noise. And that is what we call a dynamic microphone. It doesn't pick up your room noise as bad. Unfortunately, I did not know this when I purchased my microphone. And I'm going to pull my mic over here. This is not a dynamic mic. This is what the next type of mic we're going to talk about, which is a condenser mic. And a condenser mic has some issues with it that a regular microphone does not have. And I just realized that I had my settings to my mic, and so I might now have just gotten louder because I didn't have my mic pulled up to my mouth. So I apologize for that because I may not have been very loud prior to this. So I apologize. But this is a condenser mic, but what is highly recommended, and I probably should have done more research before I got my mic, is a dynamic mic. It looks a little different. It doesn't pick up background noise quite as much, that sort of thing. And so let me show you my mic. Also has this, which is going to be another thing I talk about, which is a pop filter, and this helps as well. So let me tell you, it plugs into your computer. A dynamic mic as well plugs into your computer via USB. Most of these retail for less than $100, and they work great with most Macs and PCs. So that's a dynamic mic. And like I said, I'm going to give you a download that will have links to 2 specific mics that are recommended. This one here is a condenser mic, and it's more sensitive to that background noise and room noise, which is really bad in my situation. And but this is a good second option. I may invest in a new mic soon since I've had my podcast for almost 3 years. The one thing you want to avoid is a built-in computer mic. While they may be super convenient, they are not suitable for producing quality podcast recordings. The second thing that we were going to talk about, or tool or equipment, is a microphone stand. What is most recommended is a desk mount boom arm. And as you can see, I hope you can kind of see, I'm going to move mine a little bit here. This is a boom arm. This is connected to my desk, and I can move it out of the way. I can pull it in, and it moves out of the way when you're not recording. It helps reduce the transmission of vibrations from your desk or from banging or bumping your desk, for example, if I did that on accident. Another acceptable option would be a desktop stand. Most mics come with a desktop stand. So it just, the mic screws into it. You set it on your desk. It will transmit some of those vibrations from the desk to the mic that a boom arm won't. But it is much less expensive. A boom arm is around $100. You want to avoid holding the mic in your hand. It's difficult to maintain a consistent position of the mic and keep it at the same distance from your mouth. And so that is not recommended. And then thirdly, you want to get a pop filter or windscreen. And I showed you, this is my pop filter. These things are technically different. The purpose of them is similar, to prevent windy or popping sounds. So these are called plosives, and are made when the air flowing out of your mouth is blocked, then suddenly released, as when you're saying words which include like P, K, T. You hear it, p, p. It helps reduce that. Pop filters are generally either a thin fabric screen like I have, or you can get like the puffy things that go on the end of the mic. And this one, they typically sell for around $15. So they're not very expensive. The next one is a shock mount. This is let me show you. This is my shock mount. You see this it has like stretchy things. Okay. A shock mount is designed to suspend your microphone and to isolate it from vibrations that can be transmitted from your desk into the mic through the stand and then into your recording. More expensive mics will come with a shock mount, but often can be purchased for the popular and less expensive mics. So I believe mine came with my microphone. So look at the listing when you're purchasing your mic to see if one comes with yours. All right. The next one that is recommended but not required is headphones. When you're recording a solo podcast or a multi-participant podcast where all the participants are in the same room, headphones are not required, but they could be helpful. But if you choose to have a podcast with a guest, you'll need the headphones so that you can hear them and it's not like playing in the sound and being picked up in your microphone. Again, on this download that I'm going to give you some options. Recommended is the ones that go all the way over your ears, cover your ears completely. And those are retail for around $150. But acceptable are wired earbuds. So, like those that you used to get with, I don't think they come with an iPhone anymore, but the ones that you plug in to the audio receptor on your computer and they go in your ears. Those are acceptable. And those will work. They do not isolate the sound in your ear, which can cause the audio from your speakers coming through your earbuds to be picked up, making it a little bit more challenging, but those can be used. You want to avoid Bluetooth wireless headphones. They can introduce delays in the audio as it's streamed to the computer and back and cause some connection issues. So you don't want to use those. Obviously, this is what goes without saying probably, but you have to have a computer and you want to use a Windows or a Mac computer. It is not recommended to use like a Google Chromebook because it cannot use the software that is necessary for recording and especially for editing a podcast. Another required is recording software. So for a solo podcast, recording software can be really simple. And it's a standalone recorder application such as Windows Sound Recorder or Mac voice memos, or you can use a sophisticated one such as Pro Tools. But usually the Windows Sound Recorder comes comes on your computer, and the Mac voice memos. But if you have a multi-participant podcast, you should record each person on individual tracks, and you will need a remote recording service to do that, which we'll talk about in just a second. Another optional is a digital recorder. These can get expensive, from $150 to $700. And the most people, the reason that they get one of these is if they're going to be recording remotely, like away from their home. So I don't think it's going to be as common for someone who's just getting started. But those are an option. And then lastly, the remote recording software, if you're choosing to have a podcast guest. And that way you can put the two different tracks together. Recommended is either Riverside.fm or Squadcast.fm. Both are similar services. They both record top quality audio, with the quality of the setup being the limiting factor and beyond the control of the services. And they can be used to create YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook videos in addition to just the audio of a podcast. And another acceptable one is StreamYard. And that's what I'm using right now to host this live video. And it is another acceptable option. You want to avoid programs to record podcasts such as Zoom or Skype. Conference software is generally not designed to record each participant individually, although some, such as Zoom, have added that capability if you know how to access it. But generally, these individual recordings are not recorded locally, and you have to have remote access to them. It can kind of be glitchy too. And then the last thing, or I think it's next to last. Let me go to the next slide. No, the last thing is editing software. And that is such as Audacity, which is free and it's the most popular. And it is what I use. It's open source and it's available for download, and you can go and download it for free and use it on your computer. This works with a Windows or a Mac computer. So this is another great option. Reaper is very popular within the podcast community. It's Honorware, which means you can download a full-featured, fully functioning version with no artificial limitations. And after 60 days, if you like it and wish to continue using it, you purchase a license. But it's like on an honor system. And then finally is GarageBand, which is a free audio editor from Apple. So it would be needed to be used on a Mac. Excuse me. There are also some subscription services that you can use. And those are called Descript and Hindenburg. I've had some, I personally have had some, what do you call it? I lost train of thought there. Some experience with Descript, but not with Hindenburg. Hindenburg is like top of the line. When I went to a podcast conference back in 2020, before I started my podcast, they had the guy who, I want to say it was the guy who started Hindenburg. Excuse me. And they like gave us a tour of it, like a training on it. It was amazing. It could do all kinds of amazing things, and it has some unique features that others cannot do. But it is also comes with a huge learning curve if you're not familiar with it. So those are your podcast equipment. And like I said, let me grab the link and I will put it in the comments when we're done for you to download our podcast equipment quick guide. And this will have links to some of these equipment pieces that I've talked about on today's training. So I'll do that as soon as we get off. I'm almost done. Okay, so recording tips. Let's talk about some recording tips. It's important to think about your location when you're recording. I'm trying to find ways to improve my location, recording location, because a quiet location away from your household noise and outside noise as much as possible is necessary. You want a smaller room with carpet and little bare wall space. That's one of my problems is these walls don't have a lot on them, so they don't help with the sound a lot. But find a quiet space. Find a quiet space is most important. Your setup. Try to place your computer as far away from your microphone as possible, under your desk, behind your monitor, or other obstructions to lessen that fan sound that comes out of your computer. My computer, the CPU is under my desk, so the fan sound is not real close to my computer. And then if you can sufficiently reduce the sound of your fan, if you cannot, rather, position your mic so that the source of unwanted sound is 180 degrees behind the front of your microphone. And you want to place your mic approximately 3 inches from your face, the width of your fist from your thumb to your pinky. So see, I kind of have mine about that amount of space. All right. And then be sure you know where the front of your microphone is. I am embarrassed to admit that I did not know this until recently, and learning this has helped the sound of my podcast. And then let's talk about the session. You want to turn off any noise generating devices, so air conditioners, heaters, fans, turning your thermostat so it doesn't like pop on, that kind of stuff. And you want to ask your family to respect your recording session. No loud music or television if it can be heard in your recording area. No running and yelling inside and out. I'll tell you, I struggled with this. I started my podcast in 2020 when we were all home because of COVID. And I would have to either get up really early and record my podcast when everybody was asleep, or I would have to wait until they all went to my mother-in-law's next door or something along those lines. I would literally beg them to let me record my podcast. So, anyway, it was crazy, but especially if you're recording a session with a guest, you may have to ask your family to stay off internet applications that pull a lot of your internet, because it will slow down your recording speed and everything, and it can mess up. And remind your family it's only for a short time. So just be respectful, of what you're doing. And I know that this can be hard to do. And before you record, want to make sure everything's set up properly. The mic is working. It's plugged in. Make sure you hit record. I know of people who have thought they recorded an entire podcast episode only to find that they never hit record, or that their mic was not plugged in. You want to do a sound check with a guest to make sure that their sound is coming through good for you. If you're in doubt, do a short 15-second test recording and then listen back to it. You don't want to leave a whole lot of too much space at the beginning, but leave a little bit of space for editing. But, make sure that you have some space there. And then turn off any unnecessary utilities and alerts on your computer. Those things that like ding at you when you get a notification or anything unwanted. And ask your guests to do the same. Silence your phone so it doesn't make noises. Even disable the sound on your smartwatch. And try to make sure your computer is not going to restart on you, stuff like that. And then you want to start your recording. It seems obvious, but like I said, some people have forgotten to hit record. So always give yourself that extra, check to make sure that you have hit record. All right. So I feel like this was a ton of information, and it might have been one of those drinking from the fire hose kind of situations, if you will. But I hope that it was very helpful to you. Podcasts are so popular. They have not wavered in popularity. It's only an industry that is growing. And I wanted to share that I am going to be offering a podcast startup, get started, and launch package. And if you are interested in that, I'm going to put that in the comments as well. I have helped numerous clients start and launch a podcast. And so this package will include, let me pull that up so I can tell you what the package will include. And then if you're interested, all you have to do is go over to my website at AliciaAvantandCompany.com and click on contact, and then choose that as what you're interested in is my podcast package. But let me pull up that package, and so I can tell you what it includes. Okay, so it's podcast setup and launch, and that package includes a 60-minute strategy call for us to talk about, and answer those questions about what you would be starting a podcast about. What would you name it? So on and so forth. I will help you set up your hosting, create your cover art and some promotional graphics, submit your podcast to all the podcast directories, all the places that podcasts are streamed, and help you launch the first 3 episodes of your podcast. So this package is now available, and I would love to help you get started podcasting. If you're interested, like I said, I'll put the link, but you'll just go and fill out the contact form on my website, and I will send you some more information about this package. But before we hop off, does anybody have any questions before I go? Sorry, I have to text my daughter. Like I said, my kids are all home from the ice. Okay, so it was outstanding. Thank y'all. Could you send me a recording of this session? I can't tell who this is, but I'll look when I get back over to Facebook, and I will be sending the recording out via email. So if you're on my email list, you will get the recording automatically, and it will be here in the group for a few more days, probably till the end of the month. I'll just leave it till the end of the month, and then I'll pull it, because I usually pull them and make them available by signing up for my list. Okay, so I'm going to post the link to the PDF, that's Podcast Equipment Quick Guide, and the link to sign up to get more information about my podcast package in the comments here if you are wanting to hear about either of those. Oh, hi, Gary. Yes, you will be getting it. Are you on my list or not? If not, I need to get your email address. All right. Well, thank you all so much. I hope you have a great Thursday. And if it's cold in your neck of the woods like it is here, stay warm. Thanks. Bye-bye.